AskReddit by Saw Matador. What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? The first time I had dinner at my parents' house after I got my own apartment. My dad was giving me grief as usual. Finally, I stood up and said, "I don't live here anymore. I don't have to put up with you this way any longer. I'm going home." And walked out. Most liberating moment of my life. It's funny, I have an 18-year-old, and just tonight I was saying to him to remember that he has the right to walk away when he's being mistreated, whether it is by us, a boss or whomever. It took me way too long into adulthood to realize it on my own. Kudos to you for figuring it out early. I've also stressed with him growing up that he should always commit part of his money to savings, to what I call the fuck you fund. I see it as giving someone the freedom and resources to say fuck you and leave situations as needed. I told my ex I was getting remarried. He told me he was going to stop me and put a line on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding and I'd have to pay him all of this money. La di da. Get to court. His attorney goes blah 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 for what felt like forever. My lawyer, yes, I had to freaking get one, stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. Judge looks at ex's lawyer and basically asks, "Did you even ask for this document before filing?" and dismisses the case. TLDR, a pair of angry moms threatened legal action if I fired their useless kids. I work for a trampoline park franchise. We opened a sister location that I ran for about a year and a half before moving back to take over the old location. When I got back, a lot needed fixing, but in particular there were 2 teenage employees that had been fired suspended on numerous occasions. They were generally lazy, rude jackasses that shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Problem was, they both had aggressive helicopter moms that intimidated the manager into rescinding any punishments. Once I came back, I took stock of our employees and had a long talk with the entire leadership team. I learned which employees caused which problems, who was unreliable, who had a regular habit of skipping shifts, texting on shift, etc. I fired about a half dozen that first week, including those 2 I mentioned. That night, both moms called my personal cell to scream at me. Our numbers are listed in the online scheduling tool so employees can find shift covers more easily. They demanded to know why I fired them, threatened to sue, have me arrested, accused me of discrimination against their white middle class sons, etc. I simply asked, "Is your son over 18? Yes. So you're demanding I illegally release personal information regarding a former adult employee? Bye." Not me, but a story my dad used to tell me all the time. So my biological grown mother was very emotionally abusive. She was very controlling and tried to keep people within her sphere of influence. There's a reason why my grandfather divorced her. In high school my dad had a job washing airplanes at an airport in our area, which he absolutely loved. He's a huge fan of aircraft in general. He had classes until roughly 10 AM and then he'd be off to work until around 10 PM. It was what he loved. He didn't mind long hours being around aircraft all day. But one day he came home a little too late for his mom's liking. She said she'd take his keys to his motorcycle and that he'd lost privileges to it. The fact of the matter is that he bought the motorcycle himself and he needed it to get to school as well as work. He laughed in her face and she didn't do anything. She couldn't do anything. Your dad sounds like the cool loner from an 80s high school movie. Ex and I were moving out after a breakup, cleaning out garage. She was being critical of my post-breakup plan of moving in with a co-worker until I could find a better place to live, as most options weren't great. I took a deep breath and laughed. This puzzled her. "Why are you laughing?" she asked. I collected myself and said, "Because this is the last time I have to listen to this. You don't get to be critical of anything I ever do, ever again." It was a really great feeling, because I literally thought of the "you have no power here" as I laughed. I'm a high school teacher who teaches a lot of senior grades and so has to deal with graduation grades, references for university, all that jazz. I had a parent of a graduating kid in my classroom in June, after final marks were given to students but not formally reported, who was a dental surgeon in town, ran a large operation, donated a lot to local sports, big man in a small town. I had given his kid a mark in the high B range, and so he marched into my office and started off with the "there must be some mistake" line, which moved swiftly into the "you're going to change it because I tell you to how much will it cost to get him the A." When I refused the bribe he went to "you're fired 1-1. Not "I'm going to get you fired but you're fired, clean out your desk." I just asked him to leave. Ended badly. He threatened violence. I reported him to the school admin. He's now banned from the property. "MRI pay your salary so you work for me you lousy piece of s." It was threatened with the cops by Mr. Andermatt PG. My boss calling me at 7 AM on a Saturday to ask if I could lay some flooring for a friend of his at nearly half my normal rate. Yeah, hard pass Andy. Woman complained we wouldn't fill her clearly fraudulent C2 prescription. Brought the brand new store manager back to the pharmacy to make us fill it. She says you have to fill it. God himself cannot make us fill anything if it fails the checks. No. I grew up with my parents having screaming arguments over every little thing. They do love each other. Over 50 years of marriage so far testifies to that, and it always upset me. A couple of days ago, they popped into my house to visit for a coffee on their way to stay with friends a few miles away. Within minutes, they were yelling at each other. I took great pleasure in telling them that I would not stand for such behavior in my house, and if they didn't lower their voices, they could stand outside until they learned some manners. The meek apologist tasted so sweet. As did the coffee. I once had a boss try to give me a disciplinary, 3 months later I may add, for my behavior, as it was noted I was rude to her by several of the group's seers in a board meeting. On the disciplinary forms, you both have to write your version of the event and it goes to HR for an adjudication. She did her part and I casually filled in something to the effect of "manager continually pressured me into deleting files from our client management system prior to a regulatory audit, which is against the ethical code of our profession and not aligned with my moral standards." I accept I was short with her, but she was trying to force me into performing an illegal activity. I watched her collect up the paper and the color drained from her face. I never did hear from HR. She got fired not long after when I casually mentioned to the CEO in a bar if she remembered the encounter and explained why I may have appeared a little frustrated and upset. By Felicia. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp "do not copy" on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena." "What's your name and job title?" she answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. It's services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave and the client stopped me. "What are you doing?" "The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office." "No, I paid for 8 hours. You'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing." "Right. So anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice and in all likelihood we'll no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment." A client once paid for me to fly to New York and spend 2 nights in a nice Manhattan hotel to add a semicolon to a config file. Deleted. I was bartending one night and these 3 guys were absolutely hammered, so I cut them off. One of the guys proceeded to try to argue with me, saying he has all this money and he tells me when he's done drinking and he's not even drunk. At this point, I'm done trying to be polite and point blank tell him I'm done arguing with him, will not be serving him and his buddies, and he can leave. He looks at me and says, "Now excuse me, who are you to tell me how much I can and cannot drink?" I look him dead in the eye and say, "The fucking bartender, now it's time for you to go." The look on his face was priceless. Never forget the golden rule, don't piss off your bartender. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment pressure tank that goes under the shitter for 4.9k. Out costs were 9.3k. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said, "We'll make it up in volume." We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge bitch and would regularly yell on phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that, but after that they were going up to 10k per. She drove down with her boss the next day and demanded an explanation and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing 5k per tank and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up, and simply turned on the projector. I said, "As you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss, and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price. So if you have to pull the business, we understand." Double quote. Her boss tripped over himself, cutting her off, and said they weren't pulling out and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. Know your costs and never be afraid to fire a customer. I have many times. Most all come back. Let them save face and very often they become actual good customers. A few years ago, a guy stopped me in the hardware store and asked if I was a painter. I looked down at my painter's whites and said, "Yeah, I do historical restoration work." He asked how much I charge per hour, and when I told him, he immediately told me I was too expensive and dropped my rate by 25%. I had already given him my number, but he kept belittling me and saying I wasn't worth it. I just told him that I already had a full-time job and this would be in my off hours, so it needed to be worth my while. He finally let me leave the store, then called me 3 or 4 times, each time hemming and hawing over if he wanted to actually use me or not. He's got a bunch of properties. It would be a sweet gig, but not at those prices. And I just kept telling him that's fine. Don't use me if you don't want to. Eventually I recognized his number and stopped picking up. He really thought he had some sort of power over me, and I'd jump at the opportunity. Luckily I didn't have to take the work. I was making good enough money as it was. He would have nitpicked absolutely everything, and probably not paid me at the end anyway. But he was so certain he'd have power in the situation, that he didn't seem able to comprehend me not wanting to barter with him. I work as a freelance writer. I have clients try to pull this shit with me too. I can get it cheaper, yeah, you can. Your work probably won't be done right and I won't be wasting my time with an underpaying client. It's like they have no concept at all that they are actively doing me a favor by bothering someone else with their nonsense. My parents came to visit and my mother, who is very old-fashioned, the woman should be a homemaker and if not she shouldn't out-earn the man kind of old-fashioned, told my wife, who makes stacks as a dev team manager compared to my peanuts as a sports writer, "You know dear, you really should try to keep a cleaner house." And without looking up from her making lunch, my wife said, "Yeah, your son forgot to clean this week before you guys flew," and the stunned look on my mom's face was priceless. I love it. Sounds like something my wife would say too. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years, putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure our store was set to be closed, and for the last month the store was sold to liquidation company. Meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. Geez, did you just skip to work every day for that last month? I would love to just hang out in the store and witness the deserved sass. Customer service is rough. Obligatory not mine but this video https://yahoo.be/xarm8kvs1m0 close bracket belongs in this thread. This is the best you don't have power here move I have ever seen lol. She was working for government, has problem sitting with baby on plane, tried to eat the job of their hostess then reverse card lol. Funny the 180 she flips on the flight attendants I want this woman off my plane. I'm sorry. I'm just really stressed out some people super suck. New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He didn't have a pass card yet and a lower level employee told him that he can't enter without pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in, but the worker insisted, show me the pass card, or you're not entering. And X200B. Few days later this worker got a bonus. Did said CEO grant the bonus? Sorry if that's a stupid question. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company not the consultants. It felt good. I have kind of a similar one. I worked for company A for 6 years before I decided to try something new. When I worked at company B I did some very specific things in a very specific field. Company A was having some issues with that topic and gave me a great offer to come back. My second day back we had a meeting about that topic. My VP said I'd take lead on it. A director tried to pull rank, got all pissy, and said his team would handle it and that they didn't need help from my VP or his team. Our CFO stopped him, said Sardines was taking lead, and that if I needed help I was free to reach